Add a little bit of this one, you get the mechanics and the gameplay and put them in. Alright, no, here. A little bit of structure and... oh my god, it is perfect. You know, before this game came out, I was one of the skeptics. I'll admit, I was right there with half of the Zelda community whining about all of the missteps taken in Tears of the Kingdom. In fact, the very first video I posted to this channel was me critiquing Tears of the Kingdom. The dungeons were small and easily bypassed by simple solutions. It didn't reward creative puzzle solving, it rewarded repetitive behavior using the same few overpowered Zonai devices. So when the trailers for Echoes of Wisdom started coming out, I was anxious to say the least. Zelda can use any echo she wants. This game prioritizes true freedom. Even the menus look exactly like Tears of the Kingdom. I was scared that top-down Zelda was about to follow the exact same path 3D Zelda did. They were about to go too far, and it would hurt my enjoyment. It would hurt the reasons why I love Zelda so much. But oh, how I couldn't have been more wrong. Echoes of Wisdom is the perfect blend. It's a mix of old and new. It's everything I wanted Tears of the Kingdom to be right here, and I've just played it. I just beat it yesterday as the recording of this script. It's an adventure that kept me engaged to the very end, and a game that's now a contender for my game of the year. But most of all, a Zelda game that delivers pretty much everything I wanted out of a modern Zelda game. So let's start this review with perhaps what is the biggest controversy of the last few Zelda games. The story. How does Echoes handle the story? I loved it. I loved it! Look, I'm inviting a lot of comparisons to the latest 3D Zelda games in this review because I feel like it's pertinent to share that Zelda's my favorite franchise, Breath of the Wild, my favorite game. So when I see Nintendo fixing some of the few issues I had with it, my eyes glimmer with excitement. And Echoes does exactly that. It does story right in an open world format. Things aren't happening 100 years ago or 10,000 years ago. You're not running around looking at disconnected cutscenes anymore. The story is happening to you as you play. The story itself is a refreshing take on the classic Zelda trope of Zelda gets kidnapped and Link goes to save the day. Just now, Uno reversed. Oh, I must mention before we proceed, this review contains spoilers for the story and dungeons of Echoes of Wisdom. So, if you already played the game or don't care, come with me because there is a lot of good stuff to talk about. But, if you haven't played the game yet and are here just for an opinion, the game is good. If you couldn't tell so far, I do recommend it. Play it, then come back here to tell me how your life's been changed forever. Now, story structure time. Link gets kidnapped and Zelda goes to the castle to tell her dad that stuff's going down. Dad says, yeah, I can tell, as he himself goes down, and now we have an imposter to deal with. We're thrown in jail, learn that building home furniture is actually really easy, and escape out into the open world, in what is the equivalent to a Great Plateau section. The Southern Forest area. Here is where we learn how to use and combine our echoes to our advantage, get used to the open world gameplay loop, and progress throughout the first dungeon, unlocking most of our abilities, after of which we are pointed towards 2 more dungeons, each on one side of the map. Now we are fully free to explore the open world and go wherever we please, but unlike the recent 3D games, that doesn't mean we get to kill God just yet, nor does it mean that we get to do dungeons in any order. We are given 2 choices and can pick which one we would like to do first. But only once those 2 dungeons are complete, we are given story progression, the invasion of Hyrule Castle, and another dungeon sequence. This is a story that's happening in the now. Hyrule Castle gets consumed by a rift and Zelda has to save it right now. It gives the player urgency, it gives them motivation, it makes them wonder what's next, because you never know what's gonna happen next. It doesn't follow a structure that necessitates everything being available at all times. The game can give itself the space to plan out an interesting sequence without the fear that it would ruin the progression, because unlike Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, this game features actual, mandatory story progression. And they even give you a change of outfits midway through the game. It's such a small detail, but words cannot describe the feeling of the world changing around you being actually reflected in its design. Zelda was perceived as a criminal, so she had to wear a disguise. After Hyrule Castle is freed, she's able to walk around as the princess again. Characters that once didn't recognize her will now refer to her as the princess. The story has progressed, and the world has changed with it. And another thing that brought me excitement is the introduction of a new villain. You're not actually fighting Ganon this time, instead, you're fighting Null, the personification of emptiness itself, seeking to return the world into a state of nothingness. We even get the Triforce back into a prominent role after a decade, except now it's called Prime Energy? Oh god, no. Null is right. We must eliminate the Prime Energy and return the world to peaceful quietness. But what about the gameplay? Well, the gameplay here is really good. Like, it's actually great, but no game is perfect and it is held back by a couple of mistakes. So before I gush over how Echoes are 10 times better than Zonai devices, let's talk about the... This was the first time ever on a Nintendo Switch game that I was bothered by performance. Korok Forest? Nah, don't care. 30 FPS in the Splatoon Plaza? It is what it is. And to be clear, I don't have a problem with 30 FPS games, as long as they're stable. What annoys me is the frame rate fluctuations. Echoes is a 60 FPS game, but the Switch was not ready to handle such glory. The poor thing is almost going out. Just hold a few more moments, buddy. I promise it'll be okay. No. I think it should have stuck to 30 FPS because this game is constantly flip-flopping between 60 and 30. And when I say constantly, I mean caps locked, bold text, underlined, constantly flip-flopping between 30 and 60 FPS. It never stops, doesn't matter where you go or what you do. Digital Foundry seems to think it's caused by walking. Walking and loading in the map, the one thing you'll be doing 100% of the time while in the open world. And it lags the game. Now, there are areas that aren't as bad. I found that most areas are manageable, but nowhere in the open world is perfect. When I say this is constant, I really do mean it. But a lot of the game is fine. It's alright, we can deal with it. The one area where it became almost unplayable for me was Hyrule Field, which unfortunately was the first area I visited when given access to the full open world. And that did sour my experience for a little bit, but the game did more than make up for it. The insides of caves and dungeons and buildings, pretty much everywhere that isn't the open world, they get very close to 60 FPS. Part of me just wishes this would have been a Splatoon Plaza situation. Have the open world at 30 FPS and switch to 60 when inside the building. I believe just having a toggle for that would have made the experience a lot less nauseating for me. So, back to the gameplay. How does Zelda's new playstyle actually play like? Fantastic. It's like you're playing a necromancer combined with a builder. You summon a horde of monsters to fight for you as you sleep on the bed you also just summoned. You use spiders to climb up mountains, water blocks to scale up walls, sharks to beat the water currents, and beds to, well, do most things, honestly. It feels like each echo has its place. Even the more powerful echoes, such as the clouds, have drawbacks as they fade away if you step on them for too long and can be shot down by monsters quite easily. Every echo has uses and drawbacks. Every enemy can be useful in different scenarios. You'll be using different echoes to fight different enemies. You'll be changing up your strategy to beat puzzles your own unique way. Unlike Tears of the Kingdom, where I felt all but obligated to use rockets and fans for everything because they were just so much better than all the rest, here I utilized a wide variety of different echoes. And the way to unlock said echoes is done much better than Zonai devices as well. You'll only unlock certain echoes inside dungeons. It's replacing that feeling old Zeldas had, where you'd get a new item from a chest in a dungeon and it would completely change the way you move and do puzzles. Now, you unlock the water block in the Water Temple, the clouds high atop the peaks of Hyrule Mountain. Unlocking these on those spots makes sense. They are spread all across the world and some even in areas that are often missable. I finished the game without ever finding a Lionel Echo, for example, or a level 3 Darknut Echo, and the only reason I know those are a thing is because they were spawned in on me during the final section of the game. And it's not like I was rushing the story either. I had most heart containers and had explored the map fairly thoroughly by the end, and yet, I still believe I have some echoes I completely missed, as well as incredibly useful echoes that are just sitting in my inventory that I just overlooked. Like, what's that red one over there? Wait, wow, that's the most powerful one. You should get it right now. Subscribe. Everything feels meaningful in this game. Every unlock brings excitement. And the fact that you're not restricted by having a limited number of items to use at your disposal means you'll be experimenting with new things non-stop without ever feeling guilt or being scared of wasting anything. Because there's nothing to be wasted. It cannot be understated how well the ecosystem was handled. Even the leveling progression of Tri was done exceptionally well, with level ups lowering the cost of certain echoes, allowing for new powerful combinations, or unlocking completely new ways of using your already existing echoes. The only negative aspect I can think of is that the clunkiness of Tears of the Kingdom's menus was carried over pretty much one-to-one. Now, it may be because I've already spent hundreds of hours on Tears, but they didn't bother me as much as I thought they would. Sometimes I'd miss input and summon a slime instead of an actual good echo and die instantly, but apart from that, the experience went surprisingly smooth for me. And I didn't even mention the fact that you can play with Link's moveset for a limited time, combining both summons and your own attacks to bring enemies down at lightning fast speeds. The gameplay left nothing to be desired, and all I wish for Zelda moving forwards is that they're able to bring this style of game design into the 3D games. It's okay to sacrifice a bit of freedom to get progression that is done this well. It's a feeling I dearly missed in Tears of the Kingdom, and I am so happy that it's back once more in the Legend of Zelda franchise. Before we can move on to talking about the dungeons, I need to mention this game's difficulty. And it follows the same philosophy as the other open world Zelda games. It's baby's first Zelda game, or the hardest game you've ever played. You're in control of the difficulty here, mostly. And I don't mean selecting between normal and hero mode. My playthrough was done entirely on hero mode, so that's what I'm basing this review on. Instead, what I mean is, your IQ is what defines the game's difficulty. Failed to realize this boss can bonk his head on the wall? Yes, I didn't notice that, my brain's full of worms, I get it. Get ready to fight for your life, as each dash strike takes half your health away. You're able to beat bosses and enemies without noticing their weaknesses, but it becomes much harder this way. Boss fights are more so puzzles than they are actual combat trials. Just like you're able to stick to what works and progress in a slower but safer way, like moving around with beds and spiders, you can also move much faster by using clouds, for example. So your ability to think outside the box and find easier solutions to problems is what will define your difficulty with this game. But now, let's talk about the big boys. How are the dungeons and Echoes of Wisdom? Oh my god, I'm making a tier list video on these, aren't I? I miss this feeling. Every dungeon in this game is good. None are terrible, none are bad, none are the water temple from Tears of the Kingdom, or the fire temple from Tears of the Kingdom, or the spirit temple from Tears of the Kingdom. They're all great, but some do stick out more than others. I loved the first dungeon. It's smaller and easier, but it's essentially just a tutorial dungeon that fulfills its role perfectly. It is well paced and a joy to play. A wonderful start. The Lanayru Temple, located on the peak of Hebra Mountain, had my jaw dropped for most of its runtime as I was using fans to cool down and heat up rooms to unlock new paths in what felt like a massive interconnected puzzle. The Gerudo Sanctum had Zelda going through multiple rooms, finding hidden paths through the sand, accessing secrets and figuring out where to get the statues to move ahead. Sometimes even leaving the dungeon and exploring the surrounding still world. Overall, I had a blast completing each of these games' dungeons. Dungeons of which aren't restricted by the same activate 5 terminals shtick they pulled in the last 2 games. They're free to be their true selves. And that's huge, complex, interconnected buildings that provide a variety of engaging puzzles and fights to complete. And with this new gameplay style modern Zelda brings to the table, you'll rarely find yourself stuck on a section wondering where it all went wrong as you stare into a room you have no idea how to complete. Because now, even if you don't know the intended solution, you can rest assured knowing that there are countless other solutions to the problem you're facing, and the way you're trying to do this isn't necessarily going to end up not working out in the end, even if it takes you a lot more work. And that's unlike Tears of the Kingdom, where it felt like puzzles were often overlooked in favor of simple, easy solutions that required little to no effort. They were really easy to bypass. In Echoes, that does not feel like the case at all. Most times. Sometimes, all you need to do is stack beds, but it's not nearly as common as with the last 3D game. It's not even comparable. Because here, it feels like even though you're not using the intended solution, your attempt will likely end up harder and more convoluted than what the devs intended, which is awesome. That's how freedom in gameplay should be done. I should feel proud of myself for finding my own answers, not feel like everything I'm doing was planned from the start, because why else would they let me strap a rocket to my shield? Puzzle solving and dungeon crawling feel better than ever before. Yet another huge win for the Zelda team and Echoes of Wisdom. So surely, the Zelda franchise is headed in the right direction. Let me scare you real quick. In Ask the Developer Volume 13, Echoes of Wisdom Part 2, Aonuma says the following. I used to believe that the theory behind games was that being set loose from restraints gives a feeling of freedom and growth. That's why old games were designed to slowly lift the restrictions that were there at the start. For a long time, game developers like ourselves have made games while firmly believing this theory to be right, and we felt safe creating restrictions in line with it. However, the Echoes gameplay could fly in the face of this theory at times. When you're actually playing, it can be more fun not having the restrictions in the first place. And so we asked ourselves, what do we want to do about this one? Shall we remove it? And then gradually began removing those restrictions. Over time, most of the restrictions we thought were necessary at the start of development were no longer needed. It even led us to allow things that we were worried at first would provide too much freedom. It's strange, isn't it? It's almost as if introducing some freedom attracted even more freedom. He's a genius game developer, I'm just a cat on the internet, but I don't fully trust his vision there. While I do understand and even agree that restrictions can often lead to frustration and doing away with most of them is a smart idea, the way the Zelda team seems to completely disregard the way they made games up until Breath of the Wild scares me a lot. People fell in love with the franchise for a reason, you know. Ocarina of Time still sits atop everyone else in terms of critic scores. The old way of doing progression was not all bad. This new way is great. The focus on freedom of gameplay is fantastic. I've said it before, Breath of the Wild is my favorite game ever. But this gameplay cannot come at the expense of story progression, dungeon, and puzzle designs. And now, I am scared that Aonuma and the Zelda team just don't see it. I'm scared that this perfect blend, the perfect mix of old and new, just the right amount of restrictions and linear story progression combined with all of the new freedomy gameplay was a fluke. They weren't going for a middle ground, they were going for Tears of the Kingdom again. And the only thing that stopped them were the restrictions of the style of game this is itself. The restrictions of a top-down 2D Zelda. I am scared that if they find a way to keep going, to keep removing more and more structure, they will do just that. Being a Zelda fan is somehow the best thing ever and also the most stressful thing ever. You know, when a mainline game comes out every 6 years or so, you really want it to be good. And I love this franchise, and I love this game. So instead of worrying about the future, let's enjoy the now. Echoes of Wisdom is a game that will be remembered fondly. It marks the first time Zelda gets the spotlight all to herself, and it is a complete package with a great soundtrack, well-designed dungeons, the biggest map ever in a top-down Zelda game, and gameplay that can make any grown cat cry. If I am to give it a score, this game gets a solid 9 out of 10 from me, with the hardware it is on being the main thing keeping it from a 10 out of 10. Remembering that even a 10 doesn't mean the game is perfect, as no game is. It is merely a symbol that the game does everything it sets out to do really, really well. Echoes is now my second favorite game I've played this year, and surely it will go down as one of my top favorites of all time. Thank you so much for watching this review. Subscribe as it helps me make more of these because they take a while to make. Have a wonderful day, sleep on a cozy bed, goodbye!